Spring football once again snuck up out of nowhere, and it's already time to talk about the team once again. It's good to see you guys. Been a while since we talked football. Been observing baseball, basketball, doing some stuff there. Not the best at times, but hey, we're talking sports. But today we get to talk about football. I think spring is a really good chance for us as fans to kind of recalibrate, reset. You kind of maybe took a couple of weeks off, couple months off, thinking about this team, kind of digesting it. We got the season, we concluded it, and now this is really kind of phase one of getting into the next season, 2025. So the team is underwent several spring practices by now. I think by the time you're watching this, it's been 4 or 5 spring practices. Spring's a time for refining their craft. Spring is not a time to draw conclusions about lineups. It's not a time to look at rotations, really. But it's a time for everybody just to get better. Elko talked about the fact that you have more padded practices in spring than even fall camp. And when you kind of think about a fall camp, the first half of fall camp, maybe the first couple of weeks or so, well, that's spring football like. That's kind of getting back to basics, getting back to football, improving technique, footwork, all of that stuff. And as you approach the season, you kind of get into season prep. You kind of focus on your game day routine, game planning. You start shaking out rotations. You start maybe bracing for a little bit more protection for players. Maybe not going as hard the latter portion of fall because you got to get guys right, healthy, get over nicks and knacks. Well, in spring, you're kind of just going balls to the wall football. You're getting better. You're trying to get the best out of your players. And you think about it, football season's short. So this is a major opportunity, as it is every year, to get better. So let's talk about the team. Let's talk about specific areas that we're looking for in spring to kind of, keep tabs on players, see where players are going. I think a good example is like, where's DJ Hicks at? He's a player who's been around for a while, had a couple of highs late in last season. Before that, not too much, but he's jumping into a much bigger role, you would assume, next year. I think that's a good player to kind of bring up and highlight. Several of those throughout this video. But really, we're going to touch everything about the football team because I haven't talked about it in a couple months. So we're going to go through updates, kind of just where we stand right now going into spring. It's going to be a longer video. I'm going to put timestamps, chapters in this video. So if you want to watch this in portions, if you want to pick up where you left off, if you want to skip to specific position groups that you're interested in, you feel free to do that. Just make sure you guys like and sub. I appreciate all of you for being here. For A&M, you bring a lot of players back. It's a lot of familiar faces, and it's not a year one anymore. So really, when I think of year one versus year two, and this is not unique to A&M, this is just kind of a general concept for football. Year one, you're working from behind. In year two, you're kind of more at that same starting point as other programs who aren't dealing with coaching turnover. In year one, it's a lot of teaching, it's a lot of observing, it's a lot of learning expectations, learning personnel, it's players learning coaches, coaches learning players, coaches learning coaches, how to communicate and workflow together. Well, you got most of that stuff out of the way in year one, and now that you're in year two, you should be able to hit the ground running in a session like spring football. It should be a lot more ready to go and just get to freaking work. So that's good. That also leaves less room for error because obviously that year one excuse is bye-bye out the window. So that's gone, and you have a very daunting schedule coming up this year, so there's urgency in that. And we'll talk about that throughout the entire offseason, the urgency of getting ready for a daunting schedule. I'll probably bring this up again in the video, but you can tangibly improve as an on-field product going into next year and maybe not even have an improved record to show for it. You could see a better version of A&M that once again goes 8-4 because the schedule is that hard. So that's kind of going to be a continuing theme throughout this offseason talk. I want to put that out there now. But A&M should improve. I know you lose players. I know you lose 3 players that are about to get drafted, specifically on that D-line. But you bring back enough. You have enough. This is college football. Players emerge and rise and make names for themselves every year, all the time, for every team. As Elko said in his recent presser, that's life in the SEC. You recruit SEC talent. You put them into the league. Leaves craters in your roster, and you got to fill them. So we're going to talk about all that stuff. I want to start on the defensive side of the football, where I think more so than just player personnel, the last time we talked football, there was a big discussion about the DC. We've had updates since then. Obviously, Jay Bateman is retained, but this defensive coaching room is not going without its changes. So I want to talk about that because during spring, these coaches are also sharpening their tools. They're also learning the language that works with players. They're learning their personnel. They're learning how to communicate through their new roles now. If you haven't heard, Mike Elko is taking a much more hands-on approach to the defense this year, and I want to give you my thoughts on that because I haven't done that yet. So you needed to make a change. We talked about firing Jay Bateman. A lot of us wanted that. I was quite honestly on board with that. I wasn't fully leaning into it. I kind of want to observe and see what Elko was thinking about it after the bowl game. It felt like Elko was looking to make a move. And a move he did make, but mostly internal. So instead of firing, you revamp. You move Elko up. You move Bateman down into more of a co-DC role. I think he'll still be listed as the DC. But if Elko's calling plays, I'm looking at Elko as the main DC now. So a couple of ways to think about this. There's a positive side, of course. I think there's a potential, downfall to this as well. But on the positive side, you get the best of both worlds. Elko talked about this. You don't have to deal with turnover. And when you're going from year 1 to year 2, like we just discussed, continuity is one of your main benefits of keeping the coaching staff and getting to that year 2. If you make a firing to a DC, a pivotal piece of a football structure, that's going to cause a huge ripple effect on your whole defense. That's new schematics, new ideologies, new everything, new language, new communications, new everything. So you avoid that, but you still make the change, which is positive. In addition to that, they add another, I think you would formerly call this an analyst role in Lyle Hemphill, but now that more coaches are allowed to be hands-on with players due to new NCAA rules, more coaches can be on the field with players. They're looking to add some more renowned names to the coaching staff in what would formerly be kind of grad assistant types of people. You're adding more knowledge to your base because they can get more hands-on with players. So they add Lyle Hemphill, who coached at Duke with Elko, has previous DC and safeties coach experience, and you add some outside eyes and some outside perspective to a defense that needed to be slightly or majorly reworked because we know last year, I've talked about it, the defense fell short of expectations. So it's not a firing, it's a revamp. Again, there is a downside potentially to this move, and that is, well, we just got over about a 5-year period of wanting our coach to go from play caller to more of an overseer CEO mode. And now we're getting back into that. So as much as we love Elko and his heyday here in 2020 and 2021 was so great, and he's back in that position, you do pull away from his CEO abilities by having him hone in more on the defense in a hands-on way. So that is something I'm looking out for. That is something that I think should be a storyline going into the season, because we remember with Jimbo, when he was still calling plays, you had several clock management issues, maybe some timeout management issues, maybe getting personnel onto the field, not in a timely manner at times. Some of that general coaching stuff that I think the head coach is known to go kind of plug holes during a game day situation where he's kind of free and able to kind of roam about the team, if you will. You'll be restricted from that a little bit when you're more lasered in on the defense. Now, I will suggest that I think Elko is a very organized coach. Elko, will do what it takes to win. I think I'm confident in saying that. I think any head coach would. But I think Elko has been very, very upfront about addressing immediate needs, and I think he sees this as something that needs to be addressed, and he feels like this is the best way to fill it. And I'm absolutely willing to give it a try because, again, Elko has that great track record. So going back to spring, we'll see this for the first time this spring. I think they'll probably practice this in the spring game, although that will be a much more controlled environment than a game day. Obviously, it's a scrimmage with coaches on the field. So they're going to start sharpening that tool, this new coaching dynamic through spring, and that's something I'm absolutely keeping an eye on. But that's the coaching stuff. Everything else is the same in that front across the team, really. Getting into the players here, I think your defensive conversation is where all of your question marks are for the team going into next year. Because, spoiler alert, I'm pretty bullish on this offense, and I think a lot of you guys are too. So when I'm starting these defensive conversations, I think the biggest question marks lie on that defensive line. You could argue secondary has some question marks of its own, but personnel-wise, losing players, losing quality players, at least for what they are. I mean, maybe they fell short of expectations last year, but replacing a lot of snaps, that's defensive line. So your key returners, obviously, we already mentioned DJ Hicks. He has a huge spring ahead of him. Finally kind of saw the highs of college football in that LSU game. That was the high of his career so far. Really, his only year of regular playing time was last year. We saw him a little bit late the year before. I think what he really needs to work on is kind of just holding his ground. It seemed like whenever he got beat, he got blown back pretty bad. Let's see him form some more rigidity. These spring reps are huge for a guy like DJ Hicks. Albert Regis and Cassius Howell are guys that I have little question mark about going next year. Few questions about going into next year. I think Albert Regis can be a heart and soul player for your team. Maybe not a big play guy, but a steady heartbeat, a hard worker, a leader for this team. Maybe an energy guy at times, a high motor player. And I think Cassius Howell, I've said this already, and I think many of you believe this, breakout potential at the edge position. So those three pieces, they're just sharpening their tools. I think it's centered around DJ Hicks. Impact portal names. And these are a couple guys that are going to play. It's Tyler Onyedem. It's TJ Searcy. Onyedem out of Iowa State. Searcy, the edge out of Florida, who really started busting onto the scene late last year. Florida obviously overachieving last year with a 7-win season. Many people predicting them to win 4 last year or fewer. Couple of big-time names to add to the room. Now, Onyedem, critical piece to be added. And in the spring game specifically, I'm interested to see how they use him. Because and if he's not matched with the other starters, maybe that it's hard to get a gauge for that. But I'm curious to see if they're willing to move Onyedem to some strong side defensive end. Because if you're looking at this D-line, we named a few potential starters. The 5 guys I just named, all potential starters. If not, they're right there in the rotation. Onyedem was primarily a defensive tackle, a more agile build at defensive tackle, not a nose. He played a little bit of strong side defensive end, I should say. And A&M really doesn't have a known go-to starting strong side defensive end right now. They don't have a known defensive end in a short yardage situation. So I would look to see how they use Onyedem. He could serve as quality depth for the defensive tackle position, which is also a major question mark for this team going forward because you have Regis and Hicks, and you're going to lean on those guys. Is Onyedem going to round that out? Is Onyedem going to start at strong side defensive end? I would wager right now Onyedem is the third man in that defensive tackle rotation. Maybe he emerges and he becomes a starter caliber player. He's a really good experienced player. I think he fills that role. And I believe in short yardage situations, there's a chance they move a guy like Onyedem to that strong side defensive end position. Because you got a lot of options at the edge rush position. And I would suggest they'd be willing to use 2 of those guys at a time, more so than you would typically see with a Mike Elko defense. I think you would see 2 lighter weight guys on the outside, maybe on some first and second down situations throughout the game, if only because of personnel limitations and what you have right now. Because you have Solomon Williams. Every time we've seen him on the field, he's at least had a play where he's flashed. He has some breakout potential. You have Rylan Kennedy, who this coaching staff constantly raves about. He's done nothing but grow since he got on campus. I think he's up 20 pounds since he came in as a freshman. You have transfers, Impemba out of Georgia. You have other transfer out of Pitt. You have several guys that can fill in at that defensive end, the rush side of the defensive end position. And maybe they mix and match. Maybe they're willing to put those guys at strong side. Maybe Onyedem slots over there in running situations. That's a dynamic I'm looking out for in spring. And of course, you're going to probably see some wonky lineups with the team captain voted teams. But I'd be willing to see what they're willing to do with these guys. I'd be curious to watch that. But a couple of names to watch. Young guys, Jaden Scarlett, not super young anymore, but a guy who has been working in the background for a couple of years now. Can he round out that defensive tackle position? Because we've only named 3 so far. Someone's going to have to emerge. Could it be a Dalen Evans, a guy who was a highly touted guy last year coming in, and he was going through some injury recovery, never gained steam last year. Maybe it's his time. From these early practice glimpses we've gotten, shout out Texags 247 for providing that stuff. DJ Sanders, true freshman, looks absolutely massive. Maybe a freshman can slide into that rotation. I think Elko would like to use about 4 guys at defensive tackle, and if you're flexible with Onyedem, that could maybe be 5. That's a dynamic I'm surely watching. But this D-line, man, it's one of the question marks of the team. I think there's reason to believe the pass rush aspect on clear passing situations will be just fine for that line. But how is the edge contained that was so on running plays, that was so lackluster last year? How sturdy are they in maintaining and holding their ground and preventing gashing running lanes from being formed? That's a big question I have about this team going into the next season, and that's something that they're gonna have to work on this spring, and we'll hopefully get further context in, at least to some degree, in the spring game. And of course, I should probably drop this caveat here. I haven't mentioned everything in spring's taken with a grain of salt. I will say though, there have been things in the last 2 springs that have come forth in the subsequent season. So we're not batting 100 here. We're not batting 500 here. We're probably batting like 300 with things in spring that come up in the season. So it's good to keep track of these things. But again, grain of salt, specifically with rotation stuff, with the nature of these spring games that are player voted, player captain voted. But if your main question marks around the defensive line, at least mine are, the secondary question marks, no pun intended, would come with that secondary unit that actually returns most of its core pieces. I think the only one you're really missing out that you really want back was BJ Mays. So you get a bunch of these guys back, and if you think about the team last year, Elko's talked about this. It was solid play to play, but they would far too often give up these game-changing busts. It was the big plays that doomed this secondary. You think about the Florida game, got off easy on that one, as Elko's talked about, because you were able to get an early lead and milk the clock in that one. They were starting to hit on you in that second half, but you could milk that game out. Bowling Green had too many big plays. You think about the end of the year, Auburn, Texas, USC, too many busted plays. And I think part of that was the fact that you had a freshman age player out there, Des Ricks. In the bowl game, he was your lead corner, covering the lead receiver of a Lincoln Riley coach team. That is a big deal. That's no small factor in his shortcomings there. But you had him out there the whole year. I think he showed promise specifically kind of in the mid portion of the year. But as the year went on, I think he started to get targeted a little bit and, took his lumps. But I'm not throwing a guy like that back. I'm giving Des Ricks a run in year 2 and letting him compete for this thing, knowing the upside that's there, knowing the high school and the bloodline that he comes from, knowing everything about Des Ricks. I wouldn't throw a guy like that. I wouldn't throw a Marcus Radcliffe, who was in his first major step up in competition coming from San Diego State. I would give him a run. Dalton Brooks, this guy clearly has NFL potential. We've seen better from Bryce Anderson. Down year last year, certainly a junior slump, if you will. You get Will Lee back, one of the better DBs in the conference. You get Tyreek Chappelle back, not in spring. We won't be able to keep track of him now, but he was obviously a pivotal piece, and losing him, that's a big factor in the defensive shortcomings last year, because before you found BJ Mays, you had struggles at nickel. And maybe if you have Chappelle, maybe BJ Mays can go slot into one of those corner spots when Des Ricks was struggling or Javen Thomas was struggling. So all this to say, big spring for this secondary. They come back. They're now familiar with each other. They're familiar with the system. I kind of think of the secondary a little bit about how I think about the offensive line. It's a group of 5 or so that really leans on chemistry and communication, and getting 5 back is a really big deal for a position group. And getting to a year 2, maybe they understand the zone coverage responsibilities a little bit better. Maybe working on that through spring, having gone through the lumps they went through in the season, can help galvanize that unit. So let's see how that thing looks in the spring game. Let's see the reports we get from spring. Of course, Chappelle's not there. Javen Thomas isn't there. But you do have some newcomers to keep track of. Julio Humphrey out of Georgia. You have Jordan Shaw out of Washington. Shaw more of a slot corner. Humphrey more of an outside guy. We'll see if they can elevate this room. Who knows? Maybe they earn a starting spot. They earn a rotational spot. I think there's reason to believe that's possible, especially with Chappelle down and Shaw having an opportunity. You have guys like Bravion Rogers, who was kind of like the odd man out of that rotation. Maybe he has an opportunity to make a name for himself and get more attention this spring due to Chappelle being down and BJ Mays and Jaden Hill gone. Opportunity in this secondary. Oh, and I can't go talking about the secondary without talking about Miles Davis, who's done nothing but impress every opportunity he's had. He will certainly push this safety room. I'm very excited about Miles Davis. Definitely circle the name. So we're looking at this unit to grow and grow together, and spring in a year 2 is a great opportunity to do so. Again, a big question mark is this secondary. Can they progress? Can they bottle up some of those big plays? Can they prevent the situations in zone defense where you have two guys standing in like a 3-yard radius? They got to work on that stuff. And there's reason to believe it improves because you get everyone back. How could it not? But to what end? To what level? And comboed with a very much new look defensive line, what is this pass game defense going to look like? We'll see. To round out the defense, a room that I'm very excited about, very bullish on, specifically going forward, the linebacker room. Scooby's out. Let's get that out of the way. He will not be participating in spring. It's great to have him back. He got better and better over the course of last season. He's another guy that if recovery goes well, and just put this out there, Elko, every guy that's injured, Elko said should be back in summer and ready to go for fall camp, so that's good. Got to get them all back. Let's get into the other names. Obviously, you have Torian York back, leader, but I think the more interesting stuff to talk about right now are the other guys. 3 guys, Damian Sanford, Jordan Lockhart, Tristan Jernigan. I would be stunned if at least one of these guys does not become a big-time impact player for Texas A&M. Possibly multiple of them. I know these guys, Lockhart and Jernigan, very raw, haven't had regular playing time just yet. They have certainly flashed when they've given the opportunity. Sanford, due to injuries, Scooby, had to take on some bigger moments than maybe he was ready for. But again, another guy who's going to mature and get into his junior year. I think Sanford has a chance to really improve this year. And then, of course, you add Noah Mikael as a first-year player. The future is really bright in this linebacker room, but you are a very, very young room, which is why having a guy like Torian York is pretty critical to those other guys' development. I mean, he anchors the room again. It's another Torian York-led room. And we know Torian York is not the longest guy. He's not the fastest guy. I think we saw an adjustment to not playing next to Edge Cooper, who perfectly complements a guy like York. Edge covers a lot of ground, was really, really good by the time it came to be his junior year. And I think it was just a great compliment. But York got better over the course of the year. It was a slow start for York. He got better, and I think he'll be even better having obviously another year of training, but also getting these other guys up to speed. And I think the depth in this room could really prove to be effective this year if we get the development needed from these 3 guys. And obviously development is a major key for Elko. He sees it as the kind of one of the pieces in the forefront of this team's arc, being that, we saw the discussions with Josh Pate and on Texags a couple of weeks ago, and the topic of those discussions were that you were getting premier high school talent, but not putting out premier NFL guys. And that's development. Maybe that's a little bit scouting, but this is obviously a major, major aspect of what Elko's trying to do and any football team should do that may not have been either prioritized or maximized under the previous regime. And I really think there's a path for great success in this linebacker room. And with Scooby out, these guys all would have gotten reps in spring, but they will get more attention this spring because that lead guy's down, and these coaches are going to give these young guys in York their full attention. So it's an exciting room. It still has to happen. Everything I'm saying is just kind of predictive and, hype. And that's nothing until it happens. But I feel pretty damn good about this room. I know people have mentioned that maybe you need to add another veteran to this room in the spring portal. Maybe. I think the best bet is one of these guys pops in spring, so we shall see. We saw a good Scooby game in last spring game, so maybe we'll get a good, Tristan Jernigan game or a good Damian Sanford game this spring, and that'll make us feel pretty good. And that was something that carried over to the next season. It's a young group, but I think it's loaded. All right, that rounds out the defensive conversation. And again, your big question marks on this team are all on the defensive side of the football. Now, there are question marks offensively, obviously, but there is so much damn continuity on this offense, man. I'm going to tell you guys, I'm very high on the offense coming into this year. Again, going back to the schedule, a great offense with a defense that's working through things with this schedule, that could be a 7-8 win year. As good as this offense could be. It would have to hit its absolute peak upside to overcome, some lackluster defense stuff if that stuff doesn't hit. But let's talk about the offense now. You got continuity. You got upside. This is the best offensive line kind of group coming back for a season we've had since 2020. It's big time. You get all 5 starters back. You get your 2 key rotational pieces back in Fothery and either Naboo or Fayu, whichever way you want to go with that thing. And those are some versatile players. Naboo can play guard or center. Fothery can play either tackle. We even saw freaking Fothery line up at guard a couple times last year. I don't know if you caught that, but he lined up at guard for, a couple snaps. So versatile guys, outside, inside. It's exactly what you would want for an offensive line, because if you think about an offensive line, the position I played, it's usually like a 6 or 7 man rotation. You don't rotate too much of the offensive line. It's not the most tiring position. You usually lean on your mainstays, and you've got 7 of them, and that's all you could ask for, and you have positional versatility there, and it's great. But a couple of guys we're really looking out for in spring to get key spring reps in, key training, key improvement areas. Mark Naboo. How the hell is this guy playing? He just tore his ACL in the first game of last season. He's already back, full go, spring, which is just so massive for the chances of him returning to form or even improving on where he was going into next year. So he has a huge spring ahead of him, but just being there getting reps alone is huge for Mark Naboo. I'm looking at Demetrius Crownover. By far his best season as an Aggie last year, and it makes total sense. Jimbo talked about it. I think we all saw it. We all knew it. NFL size, but he came in as kind of a lankier, former tight end out of high school. It was always going to be a long-term arc for Demetrius Crownover. But now it's time to reap what you've sowed. If he can build on what was a much improved season last year for Crownover, there is NFL upside there. This guy's a mammoth on the right side of your offensive line. And the more reps for this guy, the better. It's huge. And then the other tackle, not Trey Zune, Ruben Fothery. He's finally healthy. Took him about 2 years to get there. You know, he obviously got injured a couple years ago after kind of a breakout freshman year, going toe-to-toe with Will Anderson. We all remember that versus Bama, the big upset. And then, you know, he was gone for 2 years. He didn't play at all the next year. And the following year, he sparsely played in garbage time, never really worked himself back into, regular rotation reps. And he's back. He played a lot this last year, and he has a chance to also build on a most recent performance. So those are kind of the 3 big returning guys I'm looking at for having key reps this spring. We'll see. I know some of these guys have actually missed some practices already. We'll see who ends up playing in the spring game. But these are 3 guys who need to make the most out of this spring. But if you've been keeping track, A&M has been recruiting the offensive line position really well. So there's a lot of guys waiting in the wings, and even though you lose guys like Shanahan and Dewberry, I think you're looking at your further depth here in case you have multiple injuries like you saw last year. Lamont Rogers, obviously an incoming 5-star outside tackle type of player, got the flip from Missouri. He's a player we're going to be keeping an eye on through spring. Great to get all these freshmen here on campus besides Jerome Miles early. He'll have a huge spring getting used to the college game. Ashton Funk, if you're looking at the depth charts last year, he never cracked the rotation, but if there were further injuries, it always looked like he was going to be the next man up, another 6'7" guy, another mammoth that can maybe be a bookend by the time other guys have moved on. We're looking at these young guys waiting at the wings. They're not going to be called upon. And how much of a luxury is it that you have an incoming 5-star tackle at A&M and he doesn't have to play right away? That's crazy. And if you would have told me a few years ago that's the case, I would have said you were lying. If you would have told me a couple years ago that the offensive line might be the strongest position group going into a year, I would have thought you were on some sort of exotic drug. But here we are. And it's very, very exciting. It's such a stabilizing position. It's a position group where if you get them all back and you have, changes around it, that can maybe stabilize everything and get you to find early production, even if you have other, turnover. But the cool thing is, you don't. Let's talk about the tight ends. This is actually the one group where you do have a little bit of it, but I would actually argue that there's reason to believe there's improvement ahead for the tight end group. You had some decent pass catchers in Trey Watson, Theo Miller-Nordstrom, maybe not the most consistent guys, but they were decent pass catchers. You struggled blocking from the tight end position last year. And Theo, obviously he comes from Sweden. Over there, he played essentially wide receiver. He wasn't a blocker. This is all new stuff to him. Hopefully this spring he can really kind of complete his transition into the American college football game and strengthen and get more rigid in those blocks. But the ones you added are so exciting, man. And the one that, Elko's already highlighted is Nate Borkacher out of Nebraska. High-level blocker, very experienced senior, coming in, already, like I said, drawing praises. I think if you're looking at this tight end room and the newcomers and even Theo, if you're looking at a surefire guy that's going to play a lot of snaps for A&M next year, it's Nate Borkacher, man. That's exactly where you lacked. When you were pretty good. I would say last year was like a B minus level offensive line season, and you were probably like a C minus tight end blocking, and that alone caused specific plays that I won't bring up right now to fall apart. And I think Nate Borkashire, Mike O'Reilly, those guys can be huge in that department. I think improvement, like I said, from Theo can be huge in that department. But then you get the exciting pass catchers, man. You get Amari Niblack from Bama, who had a down year at Texas last year. As Elko recently mentioned, he was just behind in that rotation there. He didn't get the opportunity. But now he returns to the coach in Holman Wiggins, who was the receiver aspect coach of his tight end time at Alabama, where he had his best season to date. So maybe that reunion will cause a little bit of a resurgence for Amari Niblack. But the one that everyone's talking about, the one that everyone wants to talk about and believe in, is Keody Armstrong. And damn, he's big, man. This guy has NFL size already as a true freshman. I saw him firsthand at the high school All-American game in San Antonio a couple months ago now. And this dude looks ready now, body-wise. I will say that technique blocking isn't quite there yet. Used more of a receiving threat in high school. But if this guy can learn at least a little bit in short order, and if you look about the way how the receiver room is structured, a lot of smaller guys, maybe more agile room, not as much size. You lose Ja'Day Walker and Noah Thomas. Maybe Niblack and Keody find themselves a role. And maybe it's more than just lining up at tight end. Maybe in these red zone situations, they could line up at some sort of receiver capacity and be red zone threats. Who knows what they'll do with them? So offense is very flexible. You'll start to learn as you start looking at this team, as I'm sure most of you guys already know. So there is a level of question looking at the tight end room. It's a lot of newcomers, but I don't think it was a particularly good tight end year last year, and I think there's plenty of room for improvement and getting some. You added 3 freaking seniors to the room in Niblack and Riley and Borkashire. You have a redshirt junior in Theo Mellon-Orstrom. You have the highly touted freshman in Keody Armstrong. I mean, why the hell should it not improve this year? So we'll see what happens. Keep an eye on that in the spring game. These guys are super exciting. But speaking of those receivers, obviously a total overhaul here. And going into 2024, I was looking back on how we felt about this receiver room with Noah Thomas, Moose Muhammad, and Ja'Day Walker all coming in. I was high on the room. I thought those guys could progress into a productive season. But the big thing with that was, well, they did slightly underperform, but I think the biggest detriment to this entire passing game last year was what we saw go down at the quarterback position. You know, the flip-flop and the build in the year one offense for Connor, then switching to Marcel. I think that really hurt this receiver room last year. So, yeah, maybe they weren't the best that they could have been. You know, freaking Ja'Day Walker and Noah Thomas, they had their moments last year, but it wasn't consistent. It wasn't what we thought it could be. So you're here sitting with a room that only brings back Terry Bussey as a player with any kind of previous productivity here at A&M. He had to go to work in the portal, and that was successful. They add probably the most touted player in the portal in KC Concepcion. We've talked about him. You know about him. You've probably watched his highlight reel a couple dozen times like I have. Dude's a baller. Dude can make it happen with the ball in his hands, man. Dude can do a lot of things on a football field. And you add one of the better SEC freshmen last year in Mario Craven from Mississippi State, a guy that Elko acknowledges, and this is what he said. The toughest cover these DBs had to deal with last year was Mario Craver, and he had his best game against A&M, I think, with 5 receptions last year. So just an elite route runner, can cut either direction on a dime. You add this duo that's ready-made to go start for you game one, you would think, and already gotten some good feedback from the brief glimpses we've gotten from the media guys in practice so far. And Concepcion has been complimented by Elko for his energy and efforts in off-season training, so that stuff's really good. But beyond just these, minuscule reports we get, because, grain of salt, I think the previous workload speaks for itself with these two. You also, right there, we talked about 3 guys, right? That's Concepcion, Craver, that's Bussey. That's not a receiver room. That's not a receiver rotation. Those are 3 guys. Those are your starters. It's not enough. So now we're looking at the young guys. Obviously, Jerome Miles, all the potential in the world, not here in spring. He won't necessarily be part of this discussion. Hopefully he can make himself a part of the discussion coming off of an injury. I think he's doing track and field right now, so hopefully he's getting better over that right now. We'll see come summer and fall time for him. But the young breakout candidates, I think Ashton Bethel-Roman and Isaiah Williams are at the top of that list right there. I think those are the next guys there. We saw Ashton Bethel-Roman kind of late in the season last year in a small capacity. Isaiah Williams has gotten a couple praises from Elko, a bigger body, I think an athlete. We'll see what happens, but I think this is just college football here. You have your 3 surefire starters, and then people just need to emerge. I don't think this is like a desperation portal position group anymore like it was before you added those 2 guys. So we'll see. That's something to watch in spring, and that's important reps for guys like them and Ernest Campbell and the freshmen that are on campus right now. So who's going to make a name for themselves right now in spring? They're all going to get great reps. It's an exciting room. But continuing with this passing game, again, the issue last year I think was quarterback continuity. You had Connor getting ready in spring. You had the offseason to build a year 1 offense for Connor Wigman. Connor starts the season. It didn't go according to plan. Reed goes in. This offense is Connor Wigman built. You have to adjust on the fly for Marcel Reed. And once Le'Veon Moss went down, you kind of ran out of answers offensively. This year, that should not be the case. You are building for Reed now. You actually started building for Reed midpoint through last season, which is huge going forward. And if you look at the season, I think we saw the better games from Marcel Reed come late in the year. The LSU game is a unique circumstance. Sudden change. Their defense was not ready for Marcel Reed. Marcel ran all the hell over them. It was great to watch. But really, I'm looking at his passing performances versus Auburn and in the bowl game versus USC, where this offense really kind of started to fit Marcel, where it was a lot more short game, a lot more quick game, a lot more RPO zone read stuff, especially in that bowl game. You really got Bussy going. You got Jabri Barber going. You got more screens going. And you have the perfect personnel to go alongside Marcel Reed in that format. Guys like Concepcion, guys like Craver, guys like Terry Bussey. We haven't even talked about running backs yet, but guys like Reuben Owens, who just recently in his presser talked about how he is trying to grow as a pass catcher out of the backfield as one of his biggest priorities. And he already had that skill set, and if he's going to grow on that, that's great, and I think we anticipated that, but it's great to hear it come out of his mouth. So this offense looks like it is tailor-made for a Marcel Reed-style player. And talking about Marcel, it's not perfect. I think it was a quality first half a year under your belt that culminated in that bowl practice session where you were just purely building for Marcel Reed, and it ended with a good performance there. But now you have the whole offseason to build around him. He's the QB1 in spring. Jacob Zeno's there, a veteran leader behind him, maybe to push Marcel a little bit. Marcel feeling footsteps of a veteran right behind him will only make Marcel better. Also, a security blanket in case a quarterback goes down again. Zeno can do a lot of what Marcel does, so that's good. You don't have this huge stylistic change in the backup. But for Marcel, it's all about developing his game in the pocket presence, kind of the ability to see his routes and see his receivers under duress, under a collapsing pocket, while he has to move around, accuracy on touch balls, accuracy on deep balls, consistency, making decisions in that pocket. That is all stuff that has to come from Marcel Reed. Now, I am bullish on Marcel. I don't know if there is concrete proof of concept for Marcel as an upper echelon or even kind of like a mid to upper tier passer. But I think there's enough known about Marcel to indicate that he is a very intelligent, cerebral, willing worker that has raw tools and obviously has this high floor with his ability to run the football and hit short game. So I feel damn good about building this thing around Marcel Reed. This is the Marcel Reed offense. He will have to progress for this offense to hit its upside. And again, like we mentioned earlier, if you do suffer through some lumps defensively, you're going to have to hit that upside to hit the upside of your season with Marcel if the defense is kind of lagging behind where the offense is. So if you're looking at the offense, Marcel Reed's development is critical for 2025's upside. Again, Marcel has a decent floor with his running ability. He can run RPOs. The RPOs are going to get smoother now. I mean, there's a big processing speed deal with RPOs. It's a flow play. And he should be better having this thing built around him and having repped it for half a season and now in spring, fall camp, summer, 7-on-7s, all that stuff. It's huge for Marcel Reed. And it's huge that they have this team around him, including that offensive line, and including another strong position group that returns from A&M, the running back room. And we'll conclude with this group. Obviously, let's get it out of the way. Le'Veon Moss, Amari Daniels, they're out until summer. And a lot of this running back upside is just about their recovery, specifically Le'Veon Moss. Maybe the best running back in the SEC when he was healthy. He led the conference in yards per carry when he went down. Elite short yard getter, elite explosive play getter just through contact and getting extra yardage. I mean, he would just rail off seemingly 5-yard gains into 15-yard gains by plowing people over and moving piles. Got to get that back. But talking about spring, like I said, we just had Rueben Owens at the podium working on the pass catching. This spring is huge for Rueben Owens. Like it's huge for a guy like Crownover. Like it's huge for a guy like Hicks. Like it's huge for a guy like Naboo. I think Ruben is one of those guys you circle for like, okay, big spring for Ruben. Coming off of the injury, playing at the tail end of last season at what he deemed was 70 to 80%. Now getting closer to 100%. Not quite there yet, according to him, but getting much closer. Elko acknowledged that, yeah, Ruben would get the same amount of reps whether the guys were healthy or not. But perhaps he gets a little bit more coaching attention with the two guys maybe ahead of him in that rotation. Maybe one guy, who knows how that goes, but two other guys in that rotation out in Moss and Daniels. Maybe Owens gets a little bit more love and care. Maybe Owens gets a little bit more eyes on him. This might be the Rueben Owens development show for this running back room. But I don't want to go without mentioning E.J. Smith. Obviously had a rough year getting into this thing. Actually had himself a pretty damn good bowl game. Averaged like 7 yards per carry in that game. If he can build off of that in this spring and find himself at least able to, assist this rotation, that's more the merrier, man. This rotation could be really good if it's 3 deep, but you add a fourth guy in there, maybe because of injury, maybe because of Nix and Nax, maybe because of the way the game is. It's a heavy running game. You need a fourth guy in there. Maybe you're running Rueben Owens in some funky stuff where he's kind of maybe more of a, pass catching, maybe more of maybe a bussy role for Rueben Owens, maybe more of a Swiss Army knife type of player. You could maybe lean on E.J. Smith more as a true running back. I'm just spitballing here. It's huge to get that fourth guy there. So E.J. Smith, another guy that'll get a lot of attention this spring with those top two guys out. And that goes for the young guy too, DeAndre Ridden, coming out of high school. Another guy, freshman, coming in, will get more attention this spring. Will get his first taste of college ball in this spring session. Of course, again, with those top guys out, maybe more eyes on him. And that catches us up, man. That gets us to where we are with today's Aggie football. It'll be fun to watch this spring. It'll be fun to hear the reports. I enjoy listening to Elko. It sounds like he's doing weekly pressers throughout the spring camp. We will get the spring game in a couple of weeks. I will drop a video that gives y'all like a spring wish list, things I want to see in the spring game itself. This was kind of an overview, players that need to have crucial springs, areas of development, areas we're looking for in terms of 24 to 25 transition. I hope this did it for you guys. So much improvement to come for a year or two, I would say, across the board. But again, we're looking at that schedule. Can you improve to a spot that gets you to that 9-win margin, that 9+ win margin? Because I think with this schedule, 9 wins gets you pretty freaking close to playoff contention. And I think at this point, we're looking at 10 wins as almost an SEC championship game lock. That's just how this is now. Yeah, that's the upside there. And I think a lot of that falls on this defense and Marcel Reed's development. One of those two, the overall defense or Marcel Reed, I think will have to hit that high mark for this season to improve upon itself over last year record-wise. So we'll see. Elko has the structure in place now. It should be very fun to watch development. We know that's at the forefront. So I will see you guys next week. I'll be going live on Thursday. It'll be a call-in show. You guys can call in, talk football, talk baseball, basketball, wherever you guys want to go. We'll talk about it. We have a lot of fun in those shows. And I'll drop that spring game watch list in the coming weeks. Until then, like and subscribe. Appreciate you all. Gig 'em.